John Fetterman is being angry and weird again and continues to remind us that he is an embarrassment and a disgrace. I'm Cameron Kasky from Bulwark. I'm joined today by my friend Adam Mockler. Let's take a look at what John Fetterman had to say to everyone today.
Let's check it out.
Did you get any clues on the floor about what time this might wrap?
Oh my God! I just want to go home. I've already I've missed our entire trip to the beach. My family's going to be back before we that. So and again, I'm going to vote no. There's no drama. The votes are going to go. In fact, the only interesting votes are going to be on the margin, whether that's Collins or Johnson and those. But all the Democrats, we all know how that's going to go. And I don't think it's really helpful to put people here till when some ungodly hour. And again,
thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Lord have mercy. That was my first time seeing that, but what are your thoughts?
Well, we know John Fetterman doesn't really love doing his job unless, of course, he is doing his job in service of specifically Israel. That seems to be the only time John Fetterman ever really enjoys being a senator, whether that means meetings with the local community, whether that means managing his own staff. Seems like unless doing what he can to service the state of Israel is involved, Fetterman doesn't really like what he's doing. But this has been an interesting story, John Fetterman, because you and I were already online, already looking at everything on Twitter, back when this guy was the fucking man. It was midterms 2022. He was running against Dr. fucking Oz, which, by the way, was kind of weird back then, but today, that would be just your average Trump administration appointee. But it was Dr. Oz who was nuts, running against this guy who was kind of like a badass rebel, wearing a hoodie, not giving a fuck. And the progressive world seems to really, really get hype about Fetterman. Do you remember Fettermania?
Definitely, yeah. I saw that online.
I knocked doors for him. As a matter of fact, I did so with Deja Fox, who's now running for Congress in Arizona. It goes to show what time will do for us. But things have really gone off the rails. In May 2025, New York Magazine report raised concerns about his mental health, detailing alleged erratic behavior and claiming he might be off his medication. Now, this comes with a lot of reports from people who have been part of his staff. And that's sort of what I want to get into today, is exploring the question, what the fuck happened to John Fetterman, especially since we just saw a war powers resolution in the Senate, which would limit Donald Trump's power to unconstitutionally do war. And while Rand Paul voted with the Democrats to limit Trump's power, one Democrat went along with Trump. One Democrat in the Senate said Donald Trump should be allowed to bomb whoever he wants. And it was Mr. Bombs himself, John Fetterman. Adam, what has it been like for you watching this guy go off the rails over the years?
Yeah, I liked him a lot back in 2020 when he originally ran, but obviously the bar was low when his opponent was Dr. Oz. That was my first time seeing that clip of him today in the Senate. And I feel like he was trying to maybe make a low stakes quip that maybe like a Senator Biden would have made a few years back if they were passing some sort of budget bill and Biden was just like, I could see Biden being like, I just want to go home right now. But that's not the time nor the place right now when it comes off as really, really out of touch, especially after what we know about John Fetterman. So it didn't even come off as like a sarcastic quip. He just seems tired and like he wants to go home. But right now he's supposed to be battling against a bill that will strip Medicaid away from millions of Americans, tens of millions of Americans. It'll redistribute wealth, obviously, from the social safety nets at the bottom to the top. So it's obviously very, very out of place. How I've seen his progression is interesting. I think it's a case of letting people online or letting activists bully you out of a position. And this is like, it also could be his brain melting, but I see this a lot of times with people that leave the left. You know, those people that are always like, I left the left. They always say it's because the activists were too mean to them or people online were too mean, which to me means you didn't really hold core enough positions in the first place, or you're such a wimp that just being bullied can make you change positions on something radically. So John Fetterman obviously ran on a really progressive platform, and he always says that he's like starting to get pushed to the center or whatever. And I think it's actually just him being kind of weak-willed and not believing what he originally stood for.
No, totally. I mean, first of all, like you said, a lot of those left the left people just couldn't handle bullying. They could not handle the fact that to be a progressive and to represent progressive things, you are very often going to have a base that will try to eat you alive at every step. Like,
and if you give up that easily too, you didn't fundamentally believe those things in the first place.
Those weren't your values. If those were your values, you would stand and fight for them. You wouldn't just go, oh, well, if you don't like me, then I'm going to go over to the other people and show you just how mean you are. There's a lot of spite to it. There's a lot of vengeance. And I think a big part of it has been
the stroke.
Well, yeah, the stroke was probably a pretty big part of it. Especially when you hear these stories about him losing his temper, his anger issues. I have a lot of mental health issues myself. I deal with my mental health issues every day. So I sympathize with people who have mental health issues. Where I don't sympathize is when people allow those mental health issues to dictate the way they get involved with legislation that impacts people's lives. If your mental health is getting in the way of that, and if your anger and temper tantrums are making it into United States politics, then you have to go away. And Fetterman, to his credit, mostly did go into treatment for mental health. He went into inpatient, but he really hasn't been the same in a while. And I think a really big part of that, other than the stroke, has been Israel. As a matter of fact, in one of the reports that we have seen that from New York Magazine, et cetera, that have involved reports from former staffers of his, he was alleged to have said, quote, "kill them all," about Gazans to a progressive Jewish group. This is, again, according to an expose written for NYMAG. So this caused fights that everyone's kind of picked up on between him and his wife, Giselle. I think that it's a pretty well-known thing for anyone who pays attention to stuff like this, that there was very clearly a rift between John and Giselle Fetterman because of the lack of sympathy that he has for civilians in Gaza. And it seems as though whatever was going on behind the scenes was able to sort of mend itself, at least to a point where they could present publicly. And by present, I mean show up together. I don't mean dress for it, seeing as he still dresses like he's going to a fucking frat party. There's been a lot of problems. He's had a major staff turnaround. And according to the Associated Press, in a meeting he had with teachers earlier this year, he began repeating himself, shouting and questioning, why is everybody mad at me? Why does everybody hate me? What did I ever do? While he was slamming his hands on the desk. This was according to one person who was briefed on what happened. As the meeting deteriorated, a staff member moved to end it and ushered visitors into the hallway, where one broke down crying. The staffer was comforted by teachers who were themselves rattled by Fetterman's behavior, according to another person who was briefed separately on the meeting. So this is a meeting that Fetterman was having with Pennsylvania Teachers Union. And it seems as though he was having the same sort of reaction emotionally that a toddler might have to a teacher, perhaps in a pre-K classroom. It's really scary and troublesome, and especially since a lot of these things that we're hearing are not from random people on Twitter. They are from people who have worked very closely with Fetterman. One of the key sources in the conversations that have been had between the press organizations that have reported on this about the fall of Fetterman is with Adam Gentleson, his former chief of staff, who's worried that John, quote, won't be with us for much longer. A year after Fetterman was released from his 6-week stay at Walter Reed, which itself took place months after he was hospitalized for the stroke, Gentleson, the former chief of staff, sent a 1,600-word email to the physician who had overseen Fetterman's inpatient care for depression. According to the letter, which contained the subject line, quote, concerns, Jefferson wanted to sound the alarm to the doctor about the senator's behavior. To quote Gentleson, we often see the kind of warning signs we've discussed. Conspiratorial thinking, megalomania. For example, he claims to be the most knowledgeable source on Israel and Gaza around, but sources are just never what he reads in the news. He declines most briefings and never reads memos. High highs and low lows, which, side note from Cam, relatable. Back to the email. Rambling, relatable. Repetitive and self-centered monologues, also relatable. And lying in ways that are painfully, awkwardly obvious to everyone in the room. This is what Fetterman's former chief of staff is saying of him. So it's sort of a complicated thing, which is like, what the fuck do we do with this guy? Because this is someone who not only has had a political crash out clearly related to the feedback he gets from progressives, especially in regards to Israel, but also like a severe mental health crisis. At what point should Democrats come out and call on this guy to resign?
Yeah, earlier I threw out the word stroke and it sounded kind of tongue in cheek. It wasn't really meant that way. Like genuinely, I think it's a combination of a lot of this happening at once. We could vote him out when the time comes. I'm not sure when he's up for re-election. It should be soon, right? But we can vote him out when the time comes. So I just think we need a special kind of coalition building for somebody like John Fetterman. If he's going to go down like the Joe Manchin route and start voting along Republican lines randomly when he was voted in as a progressive, there needs to be consequences, whether that's him being primaried. I think a primary against him would be really, really solid. So this doesn't go into Republican hands. But yeah, I mean, that seems to be the only way.
This guy needs a fucking intervention.
Yeah.
Like, clearly he doesn't listen to Giselle, or he would have a modicum of sympathy for people in the Middle East who are not in the country of Israel. But also, this is someone who is clearly having a cognitive health crisis, right? A lot of people weren't willing to talk about it with Joe Biden, but it was a little bit different with Joe Biden. Joe Biden was getting really, really, really old and kind of losing it. That is very different from Joe Biden having temper tantrums, lying, high highs, low lows. Again, I'm a fucking bipolar person. If I was in office, even at my highest level of functioning, people would probably be like, Cam's got high highs and low lows. But these megalomaniacal rants he's going on, things like that, like we should be the party that is willing to call people like this and hold them accountable. Like it should be the Republicans who allow someone to actually have their brain melt out of their ears and nose while they're in office. So I guess if you're watching this, this is a call to action. If you're in Pennsylvania, call someone and say, John Fetterman needs to go.
Or if you're in Pennsylvania and if you can put together a coherent sentence, please run a primary campaign.
Run a primary campaign against John Fetterman. But seriously, this is a very, very devastating situation. We have a Democrat in the Senate who is actually, seriously, clearly having a cognitive health disaster. And I think more people should be talking about it. But don't worry, the Democrats have plenty to say about the nominee for mayor in New York City. My name is Cameron Kasky. This is my friend Adam Mockler. Primary John Fetterman. Let's make sure we don't have to hear from this guy again.
Thank you for having me.